All right, welcome. In this video, I call this one the two women, right? And so I want to just kind of briefly give what I think is the key revelation, pun intended, I guess, of how to unfold the book of Revelation, right? So we talked in the last video that it says clearly, opening and closing, that, hey, this is not for down the road. This is for right now. This is for first century Israel. This is for John and any of the apostles who are still alive. This is for the church of the first century that are, about to go through one of the worst times to be a believer. Emperor Nero, the Roman emperor, comes in and he starts doing terrible things. Just to give you a little backdrop on him, he had some land in Rome that he thought would make a great building project. He had this massive building thing that he wanted to do, and it was in downtown Rome, and it was going to be beautiful. Each Caesar, almost like how the Egyptians would do, always wanted to add something to it. So, if you go to Luxor, the capital of, Luxor is where the Pharaoh lived, right, in New Kingdom, Egypt. And it was a big city, and it was basically like the Pharaoh's city, right? And so it would have been beautiful, very luxurious. Only the elite were allowed in. It was the Pharaoh's home, basically, but it was a town. And each pharaoh would try and add a new piece to this beautiful city and updo the next, And so Luxor was this very beautiful place. Each pharaoh added their own touch, right? And so you get a little bit of that with the Caesars, that they're each wanting to leave their mark on the world through these grand building projects that they were doing. And many of them are still around today. They were building some very colossal and well done building projects, right? So anyways, long story short, Nero is looking to add to his legacy, and he finds this land that he thinks is perfect, right, in downtown Rome. The only problem is it's kind of like a slum, right? There's nothing nice there. It's a lot of poor people that live there. It's shanties. It's the low end of the town, right? A lot of the common people live there. Probably a lot of disease, a lot of filth and whatnot. And so he gets the bright idea to pay someone to start a fire. And he's going to burn that small area of town that's got all the poor people's shacks. And then when their shacks are gone, he's going to say, oh, well, hey, you know what? Must have been the gods, because I was wanting to use this land anyways, so we were going to relocate you somewhere else. And then now all of a sudden you got this beautiful piece of land right next to the Caesar's area, and he can build his big project. Well, the only trouble was, while this poor part of town is burning, all these people are dying and their homes are going, the wind picks up and it blows the fire, and half of Rome almost, like a third of Rome is just destroyed. Wealthy people, poor people, the fire spread. And Rome was just devastated, right? The infrastructure of the city itself is this massive, huge fire. So everybody's wanting to blame Nero, and he knows it. As the word's getting out that he started the fire for his building. Everybody knew he wanted to build his building there. And so it kind of got out that he's the one that did it. So in a panic move, he says, oh, the gods must have done it because they don't like this new upstart group of Christians that we have allowed in Rome. And the Jews got kind of caught up in a lot of that as well. And so you get this persecution of Christians. And, it got so bad that, he was feeding them in the games there at the Colosseums. He was feeding them to wild animals. He would bind up Christians and light them on fire, because they didn't have electricity at night. And they had these big giant oil lamps, but he thought, hey, I really want to show everybody that I didn't start this fire, but I'm going to put a stop to these, Christians, because the gods were mad at them. And so Christians became the scapegoat. It was all demonic, right? But they became the scapegoat. And so they are being tortured. People are going from town to town looking for them. It was a terrible time. And that's just on the Christian side. And that's not including all the terrors that were going to be in the land of Israel when they rebelled and Rome comes down with the full weight of their military machine, intent on just massacring the nation of Israel. So you put those two together that really overlapped, and it's not the best time to be alive. It's a rough time. And that is what God is preparing them for. So, but I want to talk about the two women, and that's going to help put a lot of this into context, right? So there is a passage in Revelation where he says that Jerusalem is the great city, right? And then a couple chapters later, he says the great city is a prostitute, right? And so some of your translations will say the whore of Babylon, right, is the great city. Well, if you go backtrack, earlier he said the great city is Jerusalem. And now, when he's showing this whore of Babylon, he says the whore of Babylon is the great city. Well, you put two and two together. If the great city is Jerusalem and the whore of Babylon is the great city, then the whore of Babylon is Jerusalem. And to further back that up, the prostitute theme, Jerusalem being a whore, being a prostitute, is not unique to the book of Revelation. That was the common thing that God kept calling them in the Old Testament prophets. When Solomon's temple was going to be destroyed, Jerusalem was called the same thing. They were called a prostitute and a great whore. Why? Because they were supposed to be married to God. They were supposed to be faithful to God. They were a bridegroom with God. He said, I took you out of Egypt like my bridegroom. I covered you over with the canopy just like you would when you're getting married. And so they were supposed to be united to God, faithful to him. But instead they've turned to other gods. And thus, he says, they're like a prostitute. They're like a whore. They're not faithful to him. They've run to all these other gods, right? And so he calls them that right before Babylon comes in and destroys Solomon's temple and all of Israel the first time. So when Rome is about to come in and destroy Jerusalem again, John is given a vision of, you guessed it, the great city of Jerusalem is once again acting like a prostitute, turning to all these other gods and other nations and all of this evil that they've done. And so the Bible says that there is this beast, right? And again, like I said, when we will go through these a little more verse by verse, but I think sometimes the big picture is more important at first. And let's just talk about the big picture. Then when we go in and look at the details, it's a little easier to put them into the proper frame of reference. So the Bible says there's going to be this beast. And the beast is from the city of the seven hills, right? So if you live in that world, that's Rome, right? City on the seven hills, even today. Everybody, that's what Rome is called. It's the city on the seven hills. You go to New York, it's the Big Apple, right? You go to, Las Vegas, it's Sin City, right? And Rome is the city on the seven hills. So anybody in that world knows that's exactly what he's talking about. So the beast is coming out of the city on the seven hills. That's a way of saying the beast is coming from Rome. And the Bible says that he's put it into the mind of the beast to destroy the great prostitute. And the great prostitute, not only does it say that the great city is Jerusalem and the prostitute is the great city, but she is wearing the clothing of the high priest. She's got the purple and the scarlet, and she's wearing that. That's what the high priest wore. Except the high priest had a golden plate across his forehead that said "Holy to God." But this one, because she's unfaithful, instead of having the plate on the end, she has a plate that has blasphemous names, right? But it is the picture of the high priest. The prostitute is wearing the high priest's garment, except instead of it being holy, it's sinful, right? It's all just apocalyptic Old Testament imagery of Jerusalem, the priesthood. They're not faithful to God. They're not doing right. They are like a prostitute. And he says, I'm going to put it into the mind of the beast on the 7 hills to come and destroy you. So what is he saying? Rome, if Rome is the city on the 7 hills, that's where the beast is coming from. And Jerusalem is the great prostitute. And he says, I'm going to have the beast destroy the prostitute. He's saying, I'm going to have Rome come in here and destroy Jerusalem. Right? So we've been talking about, partial preterism. Much of the book of Revelation has already happened. The beast, Rome, coming to destroy the prostitute, Jerusalem, is what happened just 2 years after John receives the revelation on the Isle of Patmos. This is what God's preparing them for. Is Rome is going to come in and destroy Jerusalem. And you need to be ready for it, because you need to not think, oh, God has forgotten us, or God doesn't love us, or oh, Rome's more powerful than God. You need to know, no, God is showing you this is judgment on Jerusalem because they were unfaithful. They were a prostitute. They didn't serve God like they were supposed to. They weren't faithful to the Lord. When their time came, they were killing prophets. They killed Jesus, and they are going to be judged for it. Now, that doesn't mean that, let me just put that disclaimer out, that I am a very pro-Israel person. I love the nation of Israel, and I believe Israel has a beautiful place. We're going to talk about that in some of the other videos, in God's unfolding plan. That's future. But that does not remove the fact that Israel of the Old Testament, all the way up to the time of Jesus, was unfaithful, killed the prophets, killed Jesus, killed the apostles, many of them, and God promised that he was going to judge them and destroy them for what they did, which is what we have in the book of Revelation. So he says the beast is going to come and destroy the great prostitute. That's the first woman. But then John says, but then he took me up and he showed me another woman. And this was a beautiful bride coming down from heaven. This is the New Jerusalem. This is the bride of Christ, the church, he says. Right? So, the two women is the key to understanding the whole book of Revelation. The beast, Rome, is coming to destroy the prostitute, Jerusalem, and the priesthood, who have been unfaithful. But he says, don't worry. That's not the end of the story. She's going to be destroyed. The first wife, the unfaithful one, the prostitute, she is going to be destroyed. But that's not the end of the story. I don't want you to lose hope, because once that happens, it's going to make way for another woman. And she's beautiful, and she's lovely, and she's adorned with the beauty of heaven, and her name is the church. That's what the book of Revelation is all about. It is not a picture of the destruction of the world. It's not a picture of the end of the church, that Jesus has to come and save us back because evil is being poured out. It is not a picture of the end. It is a picture of the beginning. It is the birth of the church. When Rome destroys Jerusalem in AD 70, it may look like the people of God are done, but he says, don't think that. He says, because when you see Israel wiped out, it is only the beginning, because there is another woman coming, and her name is the church, and she's going to be beautiful. And this is God's plan, and this is the revelation that he's giving to the early church. They're about to live through it. They're about to see it, because all they've known is Israel, all they've known is the temple, all they've known is Judaism, and they are about to live through. Even the Gentiles were birthed out of the Jewish church, and all of the apostles and all of the missionaries that are coming over and reaching these Gentiles, most of them were Jewish, and they're coming out of the Jewish church with a Jewish way of doing things and a Jewish ideology, and they're bringing that to the Gentiles. And so all they've known is the nation of Israel, and that's where the temple is, and that's where God's presence is, and that's where the prophecies are coming from, and it's all about to be destroyed. And he wants his people to know, don't lose heart. It's not the end. There is another woman, and her name is the church. So when you see God's wrath poured out on Jerusalem, don't lose hope. Because when the prostitute is destroyed, the bride of Christ will shine. It is the removal of unfaithful Israel and the priesthood, and the emergence and birth of the church of Jesus Christ. It's not to say that Israel has no place. Paul is clear. Israel will be grafted back in. And we'll talk about that. Israel has some great prophecies ahead. They're going to be restored. But that doesn't take away from what happened in the first century. And we need to understand what happened in the first century. They were judged. They were destroyed. They were totally wiped off the face of the promised land, just about. But the church began to get stronger and stronger. And the church was not wiped out. The church went through some things. There was a few years of martyrs, a few years of Nero killing everybody. But birthed out of that comes this beautiful church, the bride of Christ. So that is the cornerstone of understanding the book of Revelation. Everything else comes out from there. Everything after the bride, the introduction of the beautiful bride of Christ, the church, everything after that is church age and forward. Everything before that are pictures of the destruction of unfaithful Israel. Every one of the 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, 7 seals are all taken from the Old Testament. And we'll look at that. It all comes from the Old Testament in the prophecies that were given for the fall of Solomon's temple. And so now here comes the imminent destruction of the second temple, of Herod's temple. And God is using the same imagery to show them, hey, this is what I told you through the prophets. And it happened. Babylon destroyed the temple. And now I'm showing it to you again. It's going to happen again. The temple is going to be destroyed again. And so the seals, the trumpets, the bowls are all taken from the Old Testament when God was preparing them for Solomon's temple to be destroyed. And now right before Herod's temple is destroyed, he shows them this vision again. It's going to happen. It's coming. But don't worry. When the prostitute is destroyed, it's not the end. It is the birth of what's next. Revelation is not the end of the church. It is a picture of the birth of the church. And much of Revelation has already happened. And so we will explore more in depth. I think in our next video we need to turn and look for a minute or two on what Jesus had to say. And we're going to look at some of Jesus's prophecies about the destruction of the temple and start to line up some of what Jesus is saying with what we're seeing now in the book of Revelation.